Hey kids, howdy and welcome. It is once again time for Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am your host. We're coming at you for the week of February 12th through the week of February 18th. And I'm here, of course, as I ever am with my producer, Zoe. And isn't this an interesting week for you?
Yes, today is my birthday.
Happy birthday, Zoe!
Thank you.
So this just goes out to the community that has gathered around this podcast. Producer Zoe's birthday is today. They are an Aquarius, a true unicorn. Happy birthday, Zoe! I'm delighted you were born. Thank you for being part of this experience of conscious embodiment. Yay! As ever, I'd like to start with a question, and this was an interesting one. So Frank writes, "I follow a couple of astrologers. And one of them, who is, by the way, not as good as you."
Okay.
But they mentioned something not long ago that stuck in my mind when they said Mars is out of bounds. Can you explain what that means? All the best, Frank. I love this question because out of bounds is a thing in astrology. It's kind of fun and cool, although it's not something I ever work with. And partly because, astrology is just so dense. You could go forever and just keep falling down the hole of, well, let's talk about this, and let's incorporate that. There's just too much. So here's what we mean by out of bounds. So there's this thing in the solar system that we call the ecliptic. The ecliptic is like this sort of disk of space that we inhabit. So like if we look up into the sky, we're sort of seeing a kind of a perspective of the Milky Way that's based on our shape and position in the universe. When kids are taught about the solar system, there is a faux illusion that the planets are sort of moving in this contained circle of movement. And that's not inaccurate. The planets are moving together, sort of sitting in this flat plane where they're all basically on the same level. And that's the ecliptic. You have to have that in your imagination, in your mind's eye, to understand what I'm about to talk about. So in this flat plane that all the planets sort of appear to be held by, there's like an even middle point that would be considered the place where we all interact from, the plane of interaction. But the planets are moving very dynamically. It's not a closed system and it's not a clock. And so planets flutter in and out of different sort of movement in this up and downness in the ecliptic. They do this geometrically in what you might consider kind of a horizontal way. We call that transit. So if I'm looking up at Mars over there, and then I'm looking up at Venus over there, and they seem to be making a 90-degree angle from my perspective on Earth, that's a horizontal view of transiting planets that are geometrically interacting with each other. Now, what you can't see with the naked eye is that we're all bobbing up and down in this flat ecliptic. Sometimes in the midpoint where we all sort of agree is the Goldilocks area. Sometimes a planet will appear to move above that imaginary plane, and sometimes a planet will appear to move below that imaginary plane. Now, within that vertical movement, there are things called parallels and contraparallels. So two planets can be at the same level, like below the ecliptic, meaning a little bit out of the norm, but both of them together, that would be called a parallel. And you would read and interpret that very much like a conjunction, two planets vibrating each other because they're near each other. By the same token, you can see a planet below and another planet above the ecliptic at one given time, and we would call that a contra-parallel, and that would be interpreted as an opposition. So when a planet is out of bounds, it is either above or below the flat imaginary plane that we consider the normal existence, if you will. And if it's by itself in that above or below, we call that out of bounds. So it's like if everybody in the party is in the kitchen, but you're in the den watching TV, you're out of bounds. So that's what it would mean to have, say, Mars out of bounds, meaning Mars at a particular time when it's bumping above or below where all the other planets are hanging out, that would be a moment of that planet being out of bounds. And the interpretation would be we are more likely to make choices and decisions that come from an unexpected place or that we might not typically do, right? It takes the idea of the planet's consciousness and it sets it apart from regular consciousness. So you can look at this in your natal chart. My program, Solar Fire, shows this and shows what planets are paralleling and contraparalleling or out of bounds if that's the case. And you can interpret that. Now, I don't because, oh my effing God. I don't know why I didn't say fucking. It's like, there's just too much. And it's like, what's the value of overwhelming your interpretive process with so many things to interpret that you lose sight of the point of interpreting it, which is to go live your life and have a little bit of context. So I don't pay much attention to out of bounds, although they can be interesting sort of transits because they're kind of a transit to look at. But hopefully this explanation will at least clue you in, Frank, of what that astrologer that you follow means when they say a planet is out of bounds. That planet's consciousness is capable of delivering atypical responses while it's in that space. So one of the most interesting things that's happening in the month of February is all of the personal planets having been in Capricorn and moving into Aquarius just after Pluto has crossed over into this new territory. So there are several ways why this is interesting, right? One is, if you have a month where all three of the personal planets are changing signs, that's a big month for shifting consciousness. It's going to be an interesting time if all of the planets are changing signs within the same month. Mercury does this a lot, right? Especially in his free and clear when there's no retrograde. He only spends 2.5 weeks in a sign. But Venus spends 3.5 weeks and Mars spends like 6. So that all three personal planets are changing signs within a week of each other makes the middle part of February a real gear shift kind of consciousness where how we think and perceive is going to shift and change style and feel. How we make decisions will do the same, and our emotional bodies will also undergo a shift in the middle of the week. In the middle of the month. But it's the fact that they're all going to bump straight into Pluto as they do this particular ingress because the Lord of the Underworld has just moved into the sign of Aquarius. He's hovering at 0 Aquarius, receiving each of these personal planets as they come. So this already happened last week. We're on the 4th of February. Mercury changed signs and moved into Aquarius. And then on the sort of the rest of that day and the following day on the 5th, Mercury hung out with Pluto, and there was a lot of deep and intense conversations and thought processes. My DMs were crazy with it that day, responding to my daily video about Pluto, or my daily video about the astrology that day. And so the archetypal value of this, for my money, is Pluto changing signs is a radical moment in the collective. It's a generational threshold. We cross over into a new Pluto in Aquarius generation. Even though he hinted at this for 2 months last year, and he'll drop back into the last third of Capricorn in the fall, this moment is sort of the official Pluto has entered this new territory, and he'll be here for 20 years.
Okay.
So we're standing in the crossing of one generation to the next, and we're getting this incredible gift of mind, body, and heart, the personal planets that reflect all of our personal experiences at the individual level. We're each getting the opportunity to acclimate to the new territory, first through our mind and our perceptions. That was last week. So that's like Tuesday, Wednesday for Mars, and then Friday, Saturday for Venus. So in just sticking with this idea that we're unpacking right now, this sort of archetypal power of February, from the perspective of transits of the week, it's going to be an intense week because you've got two personal planets conjuncting Pluto, and that alone is an intense transit because a personal planet conjunct the Lord of the Underworld means that that planet's consciousness is getting a taste of death and rebirth and shadow and all of the hidden things. So when Mars moves into Aquarius and conjuncts Pluto on Wednesday, you can expect anything in the realm of urges to change things, eliminations from your life, an effort to like purify things, sexual interests, and high energy output. Some of you might be like compelled to like clean your home from top to bottom on Wednesday, right? And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but you understand if Mars is the planet of action and Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth, then our desires to act will be in the direction of change and transformation. Right? So that's why I speak of the urges to change things or the urges to purify stuff.
That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, a fairly intense Wednesday. Then when we get to Saturday, like Friday into Saturday, now it's Venus's turn to move into Aquarius and conjunct Pluto. Now our emotional bodies are going to have the experience of sort of leaning into what happens in the underworld. This is a real Persephone Hades moment, right? Where the myth tells us that Demeter's sad and Persephone's been, carried away. But of course, she becomes the queen of the underworld, right? So Venus and Pluto by conjunction is a queen of the underworld moment. The positives of such a transit will be comfort and ease with darker feelings that we sometimes might shrink away from. So it's a deeply passionate transit, but it's also connected to the urge to change things and purify and make way for new heartfelt experiences. At the very least, we're all likely to feel a little more intensely over the weekend with the planet of our emotional body hanging out with the Lord of the underworld. If there's one thing that might make that a little less emotionally intense than my words might suggest, it's because Venus in Aquarius is not a deeply emotional sign. It's an air sign. It's, in fact, the third air sign of the three, which means it's the most airy of the air signs, if you will. And so there's a coolness to Venus in Aquarius. And so that might mitigate a weekend where the intensity in your heart is like a boo-hoo-hoo, lots of tears and feels kind of experience. There's an objectivity, an intellectual objectivity with Venus in Aquarius. But either way, you got the planet of the emotional body hanging out with the Lord of the Underworld over the weekend. It's going to be an intense couple of days as a result. Now, let's just sort of speak for a moment about these two passages of Mars and Venus through Aquarius. Mars will be here for 6 weeks. That's how long he stays in a sign. He'll slow down at the end of 2024 when he gets close to a retrograde that's happening, but in his typical movement, it's about 6 weeks. Mars in Aquarius is about out-of-the-box behaviors, a willingness to take risks and speculate. One of the watchwords of the Aquarius mansion is freedom, and Mars sort of helps us forge what we want by generating or reflecting actions to create what we want. And sometimes in Aquarius, what we want most is freedom and, to not be constrained. And, similarly, Venus in Aquarius takes that same sensibility and puts it into our relationships, our relationship to love and intimacy, our friendships, and how we relate to finances. So for the 3.5 weeks that Venus will be in Aquarius, you can expect a little coolness in your emotional body. That could be helpful. Listen, I'm such a crying sort of puddle of emotion with my grandwater trine in my heart. I would always welcome a period of time where I'm less likely to be feeling as deeply. But also, we're looking for new out-of-the-box experiences that light up our hearts. So we're willing to try new things in the area of intimacy and love and connection. And from the
Interesting.
perspective of finances, Venus rules our finances. And so there's always the possibility that you'll be with both Mars and Venus in Aquarius, you might be willing to speculate and take some risks at a higher level than you might in other, passages of personal planets through signs. We are definitely up for more out-of-the-box and unexpected choices. And with all 3 personal planets in Aquarius by the end of this week, now they're all going to be there until Mercury moves into Pisces in about a week and a half. So we've got a couple of weeks in the middle of February where we're all being driven by the Aquarius mansion. So look to the house in your chart, if you know it, that is ruled by Aquarius. That mansion's going to be lit up for most of this month. And just understand that once we get into the weekend, we're all being driven a little bit by the willingness to try new things, think outside of the box, and receive unexpected surprises that come your way with a little more grace because we're in the mansion that invented surprises in the first place. We change mansions on the 18th of the month, where we begin our trek through Pisces.
There's just so much going on, I feel like. Emotionally, it's like, whoa, everything's in Aquarius. Oh, now we're in
Yeah.
Pisces.
Well, it is absolutely an intense month, but it's intense in a surprising way. It's
Yeah.
like it's intense in ways that aren't typical. In fact, I would say this: when we move into the Pisces mansion, there might be a balance that happens by just adding a little bit of water into the personal planet sort of playpen. Because you got Venus, Mars, and Mercury in air signs, there's no water, and the Pisces mansion will bring some water. And if the 18th of the month sounds early,
It does. I feel like we just got into
yeah,
Aquarius.
because everybody thinks that it's all going to operate like a clock. Yeah, that's why it's just. But it's not quite that exact and predictable. And sometimes, it's like when I tell people I'm a Leo sun and I was born on August 23rd. Nobody believes me who's sort of like younger than 40 because the day that the Leo mansion was starting in 63 was, the 23rd. And if I had been born 3 or 4 hours later, the sun would have moved into Virgo. But on the 23rd of the month, not the 20th or the 21st where everybody expects it to. So it's not quite like clockwork. And it's towards the end of the day on the 18th. It's like, the 19th for everybody in like Europe and Africa and beyond because it's, midnight in the East Coast on the 18th for all of us. So hopefully that's not too confusing for you guys. At any rate, Pisces mansion is ruled by Neptune. It's where we connect easily to spirit. It's signals that we're at the end of the astrological year, where we're then invited to go back to where we started. And we started in a void. We started where there's a no thing, and that's Pisces. And because there's a no thing in Pisces, that means there's also the everything in Pisces. There's an idea that I've tried to convey a few times on this podcast about the anaretic degree, where I say that anything that is placed at the 30th degree of a sign, meaning 29 degrees and any number of minutes, is the 30th degree. Mastery degree for that sign, and any planet in or at that mastery degree of that sign is considered to have mastery over that sign's consciousness. And why? Because the 30th degree holds the wisdom of all of the 29 degrees that preceded it. Similarly, the no thing, everything, we are all one, there's only one of us here, of Pisces cannot exist unless it contains the consciousness that begins with Aries, where it's like, I'm here, then I'm on Earth, and then I can communicate, then I can protect myself, then I can express, then I can build a body, then I can be in a mirror consciousness, then I can change and transform, then I can seek truth, then I can climb mountains of my desires, then I can share with the world so it all works together. And if you didn't notice, I just described first 11 signs of the zodiac, and every bit of those pieces of consciousness exists as possibility in the sign of Pisces. And then at the equinox, we burst into Aries, who's the only energy in that void that stirs enough to wake up and say, I'll jump. So there's beauty in the Pisces mansion. It's where we understand love, forgiveness, compassion, because it's where we get that you and I are one. So if I am attacking you, I am attacking myself. Yeah. This is why I don't do activist work out there in the world, because I'm not the guy who can have the difficult conversation with someone I disagree with. So I just don't do it, because I don't want to be bringing my division into experiences. But I even know this because of Pisces. I know my limitations in this area. But it's in Pisces where we understand this principle. We are all one. If I attack you, I'm attacking myself. So 4 weeks of sun in Pisces means our conscious awareness is steeped in forgiveness, compassion, connection, and a readiness to burst into spring when it comes next month. All right. The big news is Chiron conjuncting the North Node on Sunday. So let's just start with the conjunction itself. The North Node is our North Star. It represents the collective movement forward into the future. And this is why eclipses are so connected to our progress into the future, because the nodes of the moon are the geometries that generate the eclipses as they interact with the orbit of the moon and the orbit of the Earth around the sun. So anytime the nodes of the moon are conjuncted, especially if it's a social or outer planet, meaning Jupiter and beyond, we can interpret into astrology major moments on the planet, collective movement that you can see if you look at the movement of what's happening on the world stage. And these transits, it's a wonderfully instructive astrological sort of lining up. I don't talk a lot about this stuff publicly because I'm not interested in being an astrologer who's just saying, they blew up another something or other. Here's the transit that's behind the new war. To me, that's a terrible use of astrology, though I'm here to tell you it's accurate. You know, in 2020, when there were, election cycles, the nodes were being hit in ways that showed enmity in certain moments and flow in other moments that were being absolutely reflected by turn on the news, and that's what you'll see. So I'm trying to convey to you all listeners that transits that touch the nodes of the moon are big for us all collectively. Chiron brings with him our experience of not only healing our wounds, but also acclimating to how to work with life's mysteries, the undercurrents, and the way in which energy is something we grapple with in a mysterious sort of way. This is when I call Chiron Yoda. And Chiron would not like being called Yoda because Chiron is a centaur, which means he's hot. He's a horse on the bottom and a man on the top. And let me just say, yum to that image. And Yoda's a little gnome. But still, it's the right image. Rather, it's the right avatar for people to understand Chiron in the way that I want people to understand Chiron, because truly when we respond to Chiron's movements, both on our personal charts and collectively like this, we all get better at being in the mysterious universe in ways that only a spiritual practice can guide you. So Chiron has been in Aries for a while now. He's got about a 50-year orbit, and it's erratic and not regular. So how long he spends in Aries is not necessarily how long he'll spend in other signs. But let's just say he's been there for at least the last decade. And I'm sitting here recording the podcast, and I don't remember when exactly he moved into Aries. And it's not important for our discussion for me to be accurate about that. Just know that Chiron the healer has been in a fiery mansion for a while now. Cardinal fire. Cardinal means we start it up. We don't wait. Remember what I said about Aries just a minute ago. He's the one that dives first, despite the fact that it's dark, black, and a void. There's no way of knowing what he's diving into, and he says, I'll go anyway. So Chiron in Aries is like that. Chiron in Aries allows us to dive into the healing waters, even if we don't know what's going to happen when we do. Something that happened in the middle of last year was the north node of the moon moved into Aries, the south node into Libra. That was a big change. We talked all about it. That's a moment where the eclipses are all going to shift focus, because the signs the nodes are in are the signs where the eclipses are going to be. So the north node in Aries means we are moving toward our future during this year and a half with the same kind of fiery willingness to start things up no matter what, or no matter how much we don't know what's going to happen if we do. So the nodes move backwards, which means in the middle of last year, Chiron was at like 19 degrees of Aries when the north node last spring was at the 30th degree. So the nodes move backwards and Chiron moves forwards, as all planets do. And they've been inching closer and closer together since last spring when the north node entered Aries. Now, the minute they got as close as like 8 or 9 degrees, you would have heard me talk about this in the podcast, in my full and new moon articles. Many of the lunations over the last like 8-9 months have touched Chiron and the north node. And the idea that Chiron and the north node are in the same territory means that if you want to move forward powerfully and on fire with a kind of I can get anything started that I want, you got to heal the wounds. Like nobody's moving forward dragging a boatload of wounded consciousness behind them. And this weekend, that idea comes to a kind of a peak. If I were an astrologer who talked about current events, I'm sure I could find evidence within the crazy stuff that's happening in the world that something is emerging that's a more healed consciousness that might help us move forward. Certainly on the personal level, this is what I want all of you listening to hear. This is the message that I have to offer you. The world will not become the world we want to create unless more people on the planet have healed their inner blockages to being the most spectacular version of themselves as possible. This transit that in a way started last spring and will in some ways go to the end of this year, tells us that the personal demand for each of us in order to help the collective sort of get through what I think is going to be some pretty difficult years in 25 and 26 and 27, our personal level of healing has to be as high as we can possibly get it. And so if there's hope built into this transit, is just know that this is the journey we're all being taken on. It's not like you have to like figure it out or do something. Like people will say, well, what do I do? It's like not a thing. Go to bed, wake up tomorrow and do it again. We're all being led to our individual places where we've got to drop some wounded baggage so that we can move forward more powerfully to help the world knit together one in which peace for humanity is possible. There's an eclipse in April that has the sun and the moon and Chiron together at 19 degrees, which is a direct activation of some things that might be happening right now. So be paying attention a little bit as we get to the weekend and through the weekend and into next week. I will mention this again at the top of next week's podcast. Be curious about personal level experiences of either a healing experience or the awareness of a new level of wound that's grabbing your attention over the weekend, because that April eclipse might be all about it. Meanwhile, it might be a little bit of an intense week ahead, and it has a kind of exclamation point on Sunday that's also a little bit fiery and chironic, if you will. So there'll be some things to be curious about as we get through the week. Just be sensitive to the planetary ingresses and the changes in your physical and emotional body, and just have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
So we actually have a dream question this week. Someone wrote me an email about a dream question. This is from Suze. Suze says, "Hi, Dr. Lennox and Zoe. I'm taking a medication that amplifies and enhances dreams, low-dose naltrexone for autoimmune stuff. My doc says this is the primary reason people go off this particular med. Even though I take it in the morning, I notice my dreams are very, in all caps, busy, detailed, involved, and vivid. Question: what are the implications for dream work and interpretation with dreams on drugs? Thanks so much for your delightful beingness and offerings, Suze." Well, first of all, you're so welcome. This is a great question. So let's say this, let's start with this, that indeed there are lots of medication where the side effect is vivid, intense dreams. The challenge with dream interpretation, with dreams that are amplified like this, one of the reasons it happens is that if a medication has a kind of artifact in the brain of just lots of nerve firings, that process of a drug activating the neurofrontal cortex will bleed into the experience that the brain is going through during the sleep state. One could make a kind of a non-scientific supposition and say a dream is still coming from a deep, multidimensional and unconscious place, from the universal mind through you into your dream state. And therefore, the content of the dream can be interpreted to reveal themes in your unconscious. Absolutely, that's the case. The however of it is like, well, what are you going to do if the dream you're having has 17,652 details in it and not just like, 25 or 30? You've seen my face, so this is breaking the fourth wall. We see each other while we're recording. And so we'll see my face when a dreamer who calls in and the dream is too long for my little puny mind to hold, and my face will get like panicked. It's like too many details. So the answer to your question, Suze, is your answer's almost in the question itself when you get information from physicians who say a lot of people can't handle the upsetting experience of such vivid activated dreams and they go off the medication. I would say that if you are committed to dream work and you're committed to the medication that's helping your autoimmune experience, go for the story and try not to get caught up with every detail. I will sometimes say this to a dreamer, both in my dream circles on the first or second Sunday of every month, but also here when people have been guests. If a dream is very long, I say, focus on the story. If the story is I'm walking up the stairs, that's the story. I'm going up to a higher level of consciousness. That's the story symbol. Whereas if on the third step there was like a butterfly, and on the fourth step there was a container of milk, and on the fifth step there, you know what I mean? Like then we're outside of what I'm perceiving when I'm hearing a dream is I'm listening for the story, and then I'm going to tell you a story about the story, and that's my interpretation. So that's what I would invite you to do, Suze, when you're sitting down to record a dream that has just been wildly chaotic and vivid. Try to distill the essence of the dream down to the major storyline if you can. Good question, right?
Yeah, that was very interesting, actually.
Yeah,
I think that's really common, vivid dreams on medication.
Oh, it's very, very common. I remember in the years that I took antidepressant medication, it's like wackadoodle. It was like a movie. And those were the years where I was doing a lot of dream work, but I don't think I was having the same thing as this medication where it's, so much so that people are potentially going off the med. But yes, many medications can do that. And then, of course, cannabis. I'm a cannabis user. I don't hide that fact. And cannabis use diminishes dream memory. So, I don't remember as much as I did, before I started smoking cannabis on a regular basis.
So we have an email and dream from Australia, from Down Under.
Ooh, yay, Down Under dream.
Okay, Kyla says,
Love it.
hello from Australia. I hope you're well. I love your astrological insights and podcasts. I find them very useful. I had a dream a couple weeks ago